John F. Kennedy was president for just 1,036 days. That's it. But in that incredibly short time, he brought the world right to the edge of nuclear war, inspired millions with a fresh vision for America, and left behind a mystery that honestly still haunts us today. So let's dive into the story of his presidency, a story of incredible hope and terrifying crisis.
You've probably heard this line before, right? It's from his very first speech as president, and it pretty much became his motto. It was this powerful challenge, especially to young Americans. He was basically saying, hey, don't just sit around and wait for the government to fix things. Get out there and be a part of it. Contribute. This whole idea of citizenship and service was right at the heart of everything he wanted to do.
So who was this man everyone called JFK? And what was it about him that felt so new and different from the presidents who came before? Let's take a look at how he got to the White House.
JFK's path to power was pretty fast. He came from a really well-known and ambitious family. And then, in World War II, he became a genuine war hero. His boat was sunk in the Pacific, but he managed to lead his crew to safety. That reputation for courage really helped him climb the political ladder, all the way from Congress to the Senate, and then a run for the presidency itself.
Okay, the 1960 election was a total game changer, and it was all because of the first ever televised presidential debates. Here's the crazy part. People who listened on the radio thought his opponent, Richard Nixon, actually won. But on TV, it was a completely different story. Nixon looked pale, kind of sweaty and uncomfortable. Kennedy, on the other hand, looked cool, confident, and energetic. For the millions watching at home, he just looked presidential. It was the moment everyone realized that in this new age of television, image could be just as important as anything else.
So, once he was in office, Kennedy laid out this really ambitious plan for America. He called it the New Frontier.
The New Frontier was basically Kennedy's brand for his domestic goals. It was a call to action, asking Americans to tackle big challenges with a whole new kind of energy, everything from exploring space to fighting poverty and inequality right here at home.
And the goals of the New Frontier were huge. For instance, he started the Peace Corps, which sent young American volunteers all over the world to help out. He's also famous for challenging the nation to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, which really kicked the space race into high gear. And back on Earth, he pushed for things like more money for schools and a higher minimum wage for workers.
Now, on the really important issue of civil rights, Kennedy's position definitely evolved. At first, he was pretty cautious because he was afraid of losing the support of powerful Southern politicians. But the sheer courage of activists who were facing unbelievable violence just for demanding equality forced him to get involved. He sent in federal troops to protect black students trying to integrate segregated universities, and then, finally, he went on TV and called civil rights a moral crisis, proposing a major bill to outlaw discrimination once and for all.
So while Kennedy was pushing his new frontier in America, his presidency was really dominated by this massive global struggle, the high-stakes Cold War with the Soviet Union.
So what was the Cold War? Well, it wasn't a war with traditional battles between the US and the Soviet Union. Instead, it was this super tense, decades-long rivalry. The two superpowers were basically competing to have the most influence around the world, and it was fought with spies, proxy wars, and most terrifying of all, a nuclear arms race.
And in October of 1962, that rivalry pushed the world to the absolute brink. For 13 straight days, the entire planet just held its breath.
This was the Cuban Missile Crisis. U.S. spy planes discovered the Soviets were secretly installing nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. Instead of launching an immediate attack, Kennedy decided on a naval quarantine to block any more missiles from getting in. After nearly 2 weeks of incredibly tense negotiations behind the scenes, the Soviets finally agreed to take the missiles out. In return, the U.S. secretly promised not to invade Cuba and to remove its own missiles from Turkey. Kennedy's calm but really firm leadership is credited with pulling the world back from the edge of nuclear war.
Just a year later, with things feeling a little safer, President Kennedy traveled to Texas in November 1963. He was getting ready for his re-election campaign. It was supposed to be a standard political trip, but it ended in a national tragedy that nobody saw coming.
So, on November 22nd in Dallas, it was a bright, sunny day. The President and the First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy, were riding in an open-top car, waving to thousands of people who'd come out to cheer for them.
The atmosphere was totally positive, It was a celebration. Kennedy was there to connect with voters and shore up support for the next election.
And then, at 12:30 in the afternoon, as the car was passing through a place called Dealey Plaza, the sound of gunshots just ripped through the air. The president was hit. In a split second, a joyful parade turned into a scene of absolute chaos and horror.
The car sped to a hospital, but it was too late. The wounds were just too severe. Only 30 minutes after the shots were fired, President Kennedy was pronounced dead. The news sent this massive shockwave of disbelief and grief across the country and around the world.
What happened next was this chaotic chain of events that, instead of giving people answers, just made the mystery even deeper and left everyone with more questions. The police moved fast. They arrested a suspect named Lee Harvey Oswald, who worked in a building right above the plaza. But just 2 days later, as Oswald was being moved between jails, a local nightclub owner named Jack Ruby pushed through the crowd and shot and killed him, and it all happened on live television. Just like that, the one person who might have had the answers was silenced forever, meaning there would never be a trial.
A special group called the Warren Commission was put together to investigate what happened, and after 10 months, they released their official report. Their conclusion was simple. Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, and there was no conspiracy. But for millions of Americans, that answer just didn't feel right. It didn't add up, and it kicked off decades of skepticism and countless conspiracy theories that are still debated today.
Decades later, that's still the big haunting question, isn't it? For so many people, the official story has too many holes, leaving one of the most important moments in American history just shrouded in doubt.
Even though his presidency was cut so short, Kennedy's impact was huge. The big Civil Rights Act that he fought for was passed a year after his death. His challenge to land on the moon? We did it in 1969. And his call to public service inspired a whole generation. He's still this powerful symbol of youthful energy and the idea that government can actually be a force for good.
So, what does JFK's legacy really mean for us today? Well, from the Peace Corps volunteers still serving around the world to our ongoing missions into space, you can still see his vision in action. His presidency is a reminder that a leader can inspire a whole country to reach for something great, but it also leaves us with this huge lingering mystery. It really makes you think, what parts of his story, the hope, the crisis, and all those unanswered questions, are still shaping the world we're living in right now?